Hey there guys, it's Salis, and today I have the pleasure of announcing to the YouTuberverse, Dead Space 3. I'm bad at this. Let me just preface this by saying I have not yet completed this game, so don't expect me to spoil the ending. But I am a good enough way through to make a decision. Also, I don't really play horror games because I just don't get them. I have zero fear response, and any horror game I play doesn't scare me. So please don't start posting in the comments blaming my opinions on just being scared, because this game can't scare me. With that said, on to the review. Visceral Games have done really well on the design and visuals, with some brilliant skyboxes on the planets and some really great environments on the ships and such. But that being said, as with Dead Space 1 and 2, the colonies and ships in particular look more like monster hunting grounds, as opposed to places where people would legitimately be found. They're also grey and dull. They look as if humans have never been there, or it's been populated exclusively by robots or the Beige Supporters Union, and are just glad to have some blood splattered around for colour. The planet side designs, I feel, are a detriment to the game. Even though they look absolutely beautiful, the quote-unquote fear factor in Dead Space came from the sense of claustrophobia, but a planet's surface doesn't give that. It feels very open, and there are even some areas on the surface which are very open, but not on the surface. And this removes the close quarters combat from the game. The new weapon designs are great, and with the crafting system, which I will get to later, you can make some truly insane or badass looking weapons. The Necromorphs have returned with some truly fantastic designs, from the twisted but still almost human looking to the totally hideous and disgusting. Some enemies do make a return appearance, such as the little scrabbly bastards who are really hard to hit with my favourite weapon, and Mr. Explodey Hands, and of course the Astro Squid makes a comeback, with his tentacles in every pie as usual. The space designs are also something to behold as you jetpack between your shuttle and nearby ships. Passing debris of a former fleet, you do genuinely get the feel for the destruction. Design work clearly had some thought put into it, as has the sound. And speaking of the sound, it is as good as ever. There are some reused sounds from the previous games, mostly to identify the various types of monster you're going to be presented with, but the new Necromorphs also have their own unique war cry, and they're just as freakish as ever. The music for the bulk of the game is, as with previous outings, creepy as hell and very atmosphere building. It shifts up some tense battle themes indicating there will be an attack momentarily. Unfortunately, this gives away too much warning for the attack to be scary. But the biggest change comes from the supporting soundtrack. Before, the supporting music was mostly music box renditions of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but now there's a really interesting choice of additional music. My favourite of which being, after finding the stash of a 200-year-old dead survivor, the computer detonates a series of explosives and starts playing his rock and roll collection for some reason. The voice acting in the game is pretty good too, but there are a couple of performances I have issue with. Namely, the Space Marine you play as during the prologue, who I could not be bothered to remember his name, his performance was that brief, and John Carver, who is the second protagonist, or player 2, if you're playing in multiplayer. Carver sounds as if he's had the personality stripped from him and may as well just be a robot. Even when he tries to help, he just comes across as sarcastic. And the guy from the prologue is just whiny. He constantly doubts himself or tells himself, "You can do this." And honestly, you're just waiting for the guy to die. Now, the gameplay of Dead Space 3 is fantastic. Yes, the combat is the same old shoot the limbs off the thing, but Necromorph encounters are few and far between in the early game. Although there is more to it now, because of weapon crafting. Unlike Dead Space 1 or Dead Space 2, instead of just grabbing any random object from the toolbox and sharpening the pointy bits to upgrade it, you can now modify any weapon into something insane. And this ability to sellotape 2 random guns to get into a freakish badass killamajig does give you some really interesting ways to kneecap a bitch or 6. Some weapons need to charge up before shooting, so I found it beneficial to strap a non-charge up weapon to a charge up one to cover the charge time. And that being said, just as I predicted, the pre-order bonus items totally break the game. The Evangelizer is powerful enough to blow most necromorphs apart in 5 different directions at once. And despite its charge time, it doesn't allow the enemies to get close. But when they do get up close, it's a lot more devastating. It also comes with a stasis field generator built in. When fully charged, the gun destroys an enemy and applies a more powerful stasis field to almost an entire room, thus rendering any threat in the room as dangerous as a stuffed kitten. The locator beacon is back and very useful, not because I get lost, but because when I get to a fork in the road, I would use it and do the exact opposite of what I'm told. And guess what? I found a treasure trove of health and ammo every single time. Speaking of which, all weapons in this game use the worst thing in gaming: generic ammo. Unlike the first 2 games, you had to manage your ammo for the bigger guns for boss fights, and then you go back to your basic weapons to take out the little guys. Whereas in Dead Space 3, you can stick to a single weapon throughout, because you will always have ammunition. And it's just like the health packs. Ammo and health come out of the walls. I have never encountered a single situation where I have had to panic and run out of either, at least in normal difficulty. I can only hope this is fixed by higher difficulty settings. Your other standard Dead Space mechanics are back, such as the stomp, which by the way is ridiculous. To have a stomp that mighty, Isaac would have to have a pneumatic piston for a leg, and even then it would shatter all of his other bones with the pure force. And hacking, or should I say smash it open and break it, also makes a return, but the best thing from Dead Space 2 does make a comeback: the Jetpack 0G sections. And to a lesser extent, their Space Harrier minigames are back too. And for those of you who watched me play Wet last year, you already know how I feel about those things. And of course, Stasis and Kinesis are back too. But it seems Kinesis has more range than before. I never felt the need to upgrade it. And Stasis is made totally irrelevant by the weapon parts, or sometimes the entire weapon with a stasis field generator built into it. Because the weapon stasis seems more effective than the stasis module in the suit. And you still find little bits of lore lying around as well. Yes, you get some of it handed to you by the supporting cast, which gives the story some real depth if you try to collect all the artifacts and audio logs and text logs. But despite what I have said about the gameplay, it does come with a massive problem: microtransactions. This game seems to be just a way to milk more money out of the player. There are some microtransactions which it's okay, like there's a sarcasm pack for the scavenger bot, because that's just a little extra flavour, a little extra spice for the game. But some of them are unforgivable, such as the ability to buy, for real money, better suits and weapons, and the worst by far is the ability to buy the resources to craft weapons and upgrades. You start the game automatically with all the blueprints for the biggest, baddest guns right off the bat, but the resource requirements are biblical in proportion. So now you see why you have to spend like £20 buying enough resources to have the most powerful gun. But when you can have that kind of weapon from the start of the game, it does seem a little redundant, because you'll never stop using it with the generic ammo. And if that's going to be the system they're going to use, for me, that's a broken game right there. It's just an example of business versus gameplay, and apparently, business won. But the story, I would be tempted to say, just, you know, blah blah blah, Isaac Clarke, blah blah blah, markers, blah blah blah, necromorph, blah blah blah, unitology, blah blah blah, denial. But I'd think I'm more professional than that. The game starts with a 200-year-old mission to acquire a MacGuffin. And after failing to bring it back because you get executed by a guy who commits suicide, which, by the way, is hilarious in multiplayer, because player 2 is forced to watch and not given an option to intervene or finish the mission. It's just a case of, whoops, my friend is dead. Looks like I can pretend to be dead too and get out of this stupid military who sent me down to the planet without giving me ammo for my gun. Then, of course, it cuts to 200 years in the future with no hint of what happened in between, and Isaac Clarke has started living on the moon. It's not like EarthGov would ever think to look on their doorstep or anything. He gets pulled out of his hovel by a group of rogue space marines and agrees to help because they're going to find his Nicole substitute, Ellie. When you eventually meet up with Ellie, fresh from eyeball replacement surgery, you find the crayon scribblings of a madwoman telling you to get the MacGuffin to stop the evil markers. So you embark on a journey to do just that, and if anyone claims that was a spoiler, I will lose all respect for you because you could see that coming 5 minutes into the game. And that, I suppose, is the problem with the story. If you're going to have an all-powerful MacGuffin in the game, then don't give it away 5 minutes in. Suspense is a good thing. If we hadn't already seen the key, it would have probably been more impressive, but since we found it once, finding it again seems somewhat less poignant. It may be a different character, but it's still the same player. The PC controls for this game, though, are great. There's a huge range of customizable options. Just don't enable VSync if you want a frame rate above 30 frames per second. All controls, though, are fully rebindable, and very, very responsive. There is the option to use a pad, but with this kind of game, I really don't like using one. But that being said, the pad controls are very good. I'd say they're more responsive than the console version of the game, so all I can say about the controls, they are top notch. The optimization of the game, on the other hand, is not good. My massive rig has no problems, but I always test it on my mid-range laptop, as you know, and it can run it, but only on minimum graphical settings, and even then it's so FPS laggy the game is unplayable. My friend, shut up, I have one, who joined me for the multiplayer, had no problems on his laptop, but calling his 4-ton behemoth a laptop is a contradiction. So if you're thinking of playing this on a laptop, make sure it's either a top-end laptop or a gaming lap smasher. And if you have a low-end system, perhaps give this a miss. And horror games, or should I say in this case survival action games, always suffer in my eyes in their replay value. Once you've seen a hideous thing jump out of a vent, it won't startle you again. But Dead Space 3 does try. There is a New Game Plus mode where you can play all 20 plus hours again with your upgrades and badass weapons, which would feel cathartic beating down the trickier enemies with bigger, badder weapons. But I think the main reason for New Game Plus is so you can get those bigger, badder weapons without paying for microtransactions. Another part of replay value is the co-op multiplayer. Even though it's basically the same story, there are certain changes made to the game for each mode, which are worth checking out. There's like systems whereby both players have to activate a switch on a door to get the door to open, or one person has to do one thing, the other person has to defend them, so it's totally worth looking into. Although Carver's suit does look more badass, so you might end up fighting your friend to be player 2, which for me would be a massive first. So, the question remains, is Dead Space 3 worth it? Definitely. It's got some really good new mechanics, and if you can forgive the microtransactions, you will love this game. It has some of the best atmosphere in gaming in places, and great sounds, and mostly stellar voice acting, but the thing you're going to love most is crafting. The bizarre weapons you can come up with will help you find new and more fun ways to devastate necromorphs. It's totally worth investing in, and a great effort from Visceral Games. Final verdict, 8 out of 10. So thank you for watching my first impressions / review, whichever you want to call it, of Dead Space 3. Until next week, I've been Salis, this has been Dead Space 3, and I will see you next time.